Hello, this is Paul Pui from Edge, and you're listening to Milk on CoinSpice.
You're listening to Milk, Soothing Crypto's Burn, with host C. Edward Kelso from CoinSpice.io, your home for just spicy crypto things online.
Is really going on, crypto sandwiches? That's right, I called you a sandwich. This is your host, C. Edward Kelso, editor-in-chief, out at CoinSpice.io, back with another episode of Milk, Soothing Crypto's Burn. This time around, I snagged Ivy League University professor at Cornell, none other than computer scientist Emin Gn Sirer. He is a terrific guest to have, and if you're not familiar with him, I think you'll find out, why I sing his praises so highly. He's a fantastic thinker. He's able to combine philosophy with history, and more importantly, the technical aspects of the space, and deliver them as really few can. He's sort of singular in that regard, and he's taken the more controversial position, at least on our side of things, of really kind of pushing the proof of stake idea. And if you're unfamiliar as to why that's important, again, we get into it. Right up front, I have to tell you, I'm a proof of work partisan. I have a superstitious reverence, as it turns out, for proof of work. But if anybody has made me kind of walk back a little bit from my more strident position there, it is Professor Sirer, and not for the environmental stuff, which he jokes with me about, but also he comes at it from an economic point of view that I think you're going to find interesting, or at least make you step back for a second. In any case, he is someone that I've been dying to get on the show. I tried not to fanboy out too much, but it's kind of hard not to. We get into just about every subject you can think of, from those proof of work versus proof of stake, Avalanche, consensus mechanisms. We get into the philosophy, the history of the space, a little bit about his personal life. We also, of course, talk about the Bitcoin Cash hard fork back in November and the lessons gleaned from that. And we look forward to the Ethereum thirdening, as it were, that is coming up, set to happen. So we cover it all. He is, again, a terrific guest. I think you're going to love the episode. Sit back, pour yourself a cold glass of almond milk if you're a vegan, if you're into that. It's absolutely fine. Get that spicy sandwich ready, because Professor Sirer is going to bring the spice. All right, guys, here is Professor Emin Gn Sirer. I'm trying not to fanboy out here. I'm a very, very, very big admirer. Been wanting you on the show for a long time, so I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a busy guy. Let's get right into it. I'm looking at my yellow notepad here in preparing, because I'm a podcast professional. I'm preparing for our talk today. I have 3 pages of notes, okay. And it's of anything, it's where to start with you. And I think probably we can start from your most, or I guess I should say your latest project, which is Avalanche, and your continued meditation on consensus protocols and what that means. And I think now it's no longer theory. You're actually doing it.
Absolutely, and we're very, very excited. And maybe since we started with Avalanche, let me maybe give your audience a brief overview of consensus protocols.
Please.
So consensus lies at the heart of every cryptocurrency. I think everybody realizes that the whole process of keeping track of who has how much money essentially relies on everybody having the same accounting. If you and I disagree on how much we have, then suddenly we have a system that's worthless. It's essential that everybody achieve the same result when looking at essentially balances. So every coin has its own mechanism for achieving consensus. And roughly speaking, I mean, this is not a new problem. we've had the consensus problem with us maybe for 40 years. It was first identified 40 years ago, got a fancy name in the shape of the Byzantine generals problem. You want all the Byzantine generals to agree to attack or to not attack, but not to do something in the middle. If they do something piecemeal, then they get decimated.
Mm-hmm.
So
is that the MIT paper that I hear you often cite, Barbara Listov and those fellows?
It's related. Barbara Liskov certainly worked on the consensus problem, but this formulation of the problem, one of the earliest, came from Leslie Lamport. So okay. He was not at MIT at the time, and in fact, he never was at MIT, as far as I remember. Let's see. So the Byzantine generals problem lies at the heart of this, and for many, many decades, the distributed systems research community had one kind of solution to how to keep machines in consensus. So I'm going to call that the classical consensus approach. So what you do is you have a small number of nodes, and you keep them in sync by having them vote, and they cross-check each other's votes, because you don't want people lying to you about one vote and saying something to me one way and to you some other way, and confusing everybody's accounting. So, but these systems fundamentally rely on all of us agreeing on who's in the room. They're very, very fragile. So starting from this base, it would have been very difficult to build a robust currency system. So that's why prior to Satoshi's arrival on the scene, these approaches did not lend themselves to a good solution for building public open cryptocurrencies. The moment you and I know everybody, then it's a closed room, right? So we have to know everybody, and that means there's prior agreement. There is a permissioning step involved in who gets to be in that room to make those decisions. So that was the state of affairs prior to Satoshi's arrival, and just about the thousands of papers in the entire space can be classified into just this one model of people voting on things, and then there's a decision made when there's a threshold of voters. So that's one approach to consensus. That approach is still used today for for permissioned ledgers like Interledger, like just you name it. They're Quorum from formerly JP Morgan. All of those systems are using this basic mechanism. It's the fine mechanism, but it's very fragile. And it doesn't scale to large numbers of users. It requires this permission. So what happens next? So in 2009, the second big thing happened. The very first big thing was the formulation of the problem, was this approach. For many decades, it kept us going. The second big thing in this space was in 2009, Satoshi comes in and says, look, you guys are doing this all wrong. I have a very different mechanism for achieving consensus. And for the really wonky people in the audience, it differs from classical consensus in that it's probabilistic. And it differs from classical consensus also in the sense that it is not, it's based on essentially a random lottery, and it's using this what we call the proof of work mechanism.
Right.
So I'm not going to belabor this point. I think everybody is familiar by now with how Bitcoin and similar currencies work, and it's perfectly fine. It's a great idea, except of course it has a whole bunch of downsides associated with it. All of these proof of work currencies they're very robust. We have to be fair to them. They're open. The world got to taste firsthand like how cool this thing can be if implemented in a practical fashion. So it's wonderful in every way, except of course there's this constant leakage of value from the ecosystem. You have to incentivize these miners. You do that by giving them rewards and There's like all this electricity being wasted in this never-ending mining game. The mining game is a very difficult one. It's necessarily one where there's a dive to the bottom where the profits go to zero through competition among miners. It's a system that technically it's not good for the environment. It's not good for the ecosystem itself. It divides the users into classes. There are miners and now there are users, and they don't always have the same desires for the currency, as we saw in the case of Bitcoin's evolution. And I can go on and on. And these
Okay, just to interrupt, and a point, well, I remember you making a long time ago, is that it's also it's not the dream of decentralization under this regime is from the papers I've seen you being associated with and ones that you've presented is kind of dying, right? So it actually is centralizing in ways that maybe we didn't imagine.
Oh, absolutely. We've seen this happen in Bitcoin's history a few times, actually. The totality of mining ends up getting centralized at these mining pool operators' hands. So all of Bitcoin Core's mining, for example, is in the hands of 19 mining pool operators. So that's a tiny number, right? We all make fun of EOS for being a centralized coin.
Right.
EOS has 21 block producers.
21, right.
Right. So here we are with in Bitcoin Core with 19, and it's the Bitcoin Core proponents are going to come back and they'll be like, well, how dare you say that those mining pools, they consist of many little miners? For one, I don't know that they do. There's always economies of scale, and it's just inherent that that some people are much better at procuring cheap electricity than others, much better, and some people are very good at collecting and buying these mining rigs, so they tend to have the upper hand. It's just typically these things follow a power law, and there are some miners out there with large numbers of rigs, and they do the bulk of the work.
And a lot of people I will hear even now within our space. Now, mostly it's the general public, granted. But within our space, we'll say that miners validate the transactions. They kind of do this thing where you're thinking the machines or the rigs are doing the validations, that they're touching somehow the transactions, and you have pointed out that that's not the case.
Absolutely not. That's exactly right. So the lay public thinks that these machines are doing something useful. They're not. They're only there to compete against other miners. So take a coin, like let's do what Einstein used to call a Gedanken experiment, a thought experiment. Take any coin, say take Bitcoin Cash, and it has some set of miners, okay, and they're spending a lot of money on electricity, and they're mining. All of those rigs are essentially just vying for that crucial crypto puzzle solution that allows the miner to collect their reward. That's all they do.
Kind of like
and
a lottery.
They are there.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And they are there just to reap that reward before other people can. But if you could actually get those miners to agree with each other, to back down momentarily. I'm not suggesting they do this, but this is a thought experiment. So instead of all of us spending, let's say, tens of megawatts, I spend 10 megawatts and you spend 10 megawatts and somebody else spends another 10. If we all could back down in proportion, then suddenly we'd be able to still mine at the same rate with the same security, except we do it at a fraction of the cost. It's the fact that we can't do that, and it's the fact that we want to keep the coin free from attacks by outsiders that keep everybody playing this game, that we have to constantly run. Essentially what the miners are doing, they're running in place faster and faster, but they're not going anywhere. The rate at which you can mint transactions is fixed by the protocol. It's every 10 minutes.
Yeah.
The block size is part of the protocol definition, as we know all too well. And so the rate at which you can generate transactions has nothing to do with the amount of hash power you throw at it. All of that hash power just wastes electricity. The money goes to power companies, and ultimately it ends up heating up the planet, ends up melting the polar ice caps. And some people don't care about the polar ice caps and the polar bears. I mean, I do. But if you don't care about those things, then keep in mind that the money is leaving the ecosystem. Right. That you can't really store value if you're constantly paying bills. And these people, the mining rig operators, they just they go out of business routinely. It's a tough business to be in because it's a very competitive one. So
you called that leakage, and I found that my tribe here kind of leans more to the AntCap side. So the environmental argument doesn't work as much, I guess, with quote unquote normal people as it would with normal people. But with my guys, my cranky guys here, including myself. But I think the leakage, the economic argument is really compelling.
I think so. If like the Bitcoin Core people, for example, they keep pushing their coin as if it's a store of value.
Right.
I've always been against that entire narrative. It misleads the public. It's not correct in any sense of the scientific truth. But to even aspire to be a store of value, you can't have constant leakage, right? So if you have a system built on this constant game of minting coins and constantly burning electricity, you can't possibly keep that value in your ecosystem. You're bound to crash if you're paying millions of dollars to miners, and the miners then instead in turn have power bills to pay.
And again, on the ANCAP side of things, which again is not where you're coming from, and this is why I think you're such a valuable thinker in our space, is on the ANCAP side, you know, love it or hate it, governments are largely in control of power supplies. So here we are, the supposed ANCAP, you know, we're all rugged individualists, all going to do our own thing, and we're handing over, you know, all of our dough to governments, essentially. So that's another argument that I guess I can make. But go ahead.
That's true. That's true. And also, it's important to actually characterize where I'm coming from. I've been struggling with this, Ed. And you know, I'm not an ANCAP.
Sure.
But it's kind of odd, like how this political world kind of wraps around. So you can go in another direction, and you can find yourself essentially sharing a lot of views that are identical to people who went off in another direction. They wrapped around the globe and met at the same point. So I very much dislike governmental control of resources. I very much dislike any system that is open to being taken over. I very much dislike centralized systems or systems that are regulated and prone to capture. And regulatory capture, that is. So we've seen this again and again. Everybody who's ever been to a bank, everybody who's ever, you know, had to call it an 800 number and has been told something like, "I'm sorry, sir, that's just not our policy." You know, these kinds of things drive me nuts. And so part of what happened to me in my professional career is at some point I rebelled against this and decided, look, we got to decentralize. The web as we know it is in the hands of just a few players. These players might start out really nicely, as we saw in the case of, you know, a lot of my friends work at Google, and it started out with a very lofty motto. And then suddenly they turn into these behemoths that work against the people that they're supposed to serve. So I wouldn't classify myself as an ANCAP, but I very much dislike any centralized system, any centralized control. We've seen again and again, I've certainly seen in places where I've lived, where I grew up, that governments in charge of making economic decisions often end up being not serving the public they're supposed to serve. Anyway, I digress. But
I love the digression, and we'll definitely get back to your working towards Avalanche, because that's a huge issue for the ecosystem here. You grew up, from what I'm able to understand, you're Turkish, is that correct?
Yeah, I grew up in Istanbul, Turkey.
Well, you know, now we have to call it Constantinople, right? Because
no. You know how the song goes. It used to be Constantinople, but
there you go. Yeah. But anyway, so you grew up in Turkey. When did you, or how did you find your way to the United States?
So my story is fairly simple. I was growing up, I was 11 years old, and we all had to take a big exam. I took that exam. If you were in the top 110, you got to go to an American high school. So I went to an American middle school and high school, and after that, I got a very nice scholarship from Princeton. So I went to school at Princeton, New Jersey. And then after that, I did my PhD in computer science, and then became a professor at Cornell University.
Wow. Okay. Well, I wanted to make sure we weave that in there somehow. But let's get back to brass tacks. So we're talking about the evolution of consensus protocols. I kind of pushed you out there on some of the issues regarding mining and so on. But we're eventually leading to what would come down to be problems that, with proof of work, with you know, the reliance on mining rigs, these sorts of things. You don't have to be, you know, an environmentalist or, you know, of this camp or that camp to kind of logically see, to think through the problem as a scientist would, and that's where you will pick back up, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I was saying, there have been, to date, there were only two approaches to the consensus problem: the classical approach and then the Nakamoto approach. And the Nakamoto approach has this nice property that it's robust, but it suffers from a number of issues. We touched upon the mining and its impact and the leakage it costs, it leads to. But also, there is a scalability issue. The coin can only clear so many transactions per second, and so that's a problem. And of course, there's a latency issue. For you to get a single confirmation, you have to wait for at least 10 minutes in the case of Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. So these are all issues. We'd love to fix them if we could. And so as of last May, in May 2018, there came a new paper. It introduced a new family of consensus protocols. This family is known as Avalanche, and it works entirely differently from all the other families that came before it. There are only 2 other families that came before it, but it works entirely differently from Classical and works entirely differently from Nakamoto. And the big difference, in essence, is it's somewhat like Nakamoto in the sense that it's probabilistic, but it doesn't have the built-in performance limit. It has much lower latency. It can clear tens of thousands of transactions per second, and it can give you a confirmation in less than 2 seconds. And it admits large numbers of participants. You can have tens of thousands of participants in this game, all making decisions on transactions. You can participate in the Avalanche protocol with essentially something like a cell phone and help secure the network yourself firsthand without having to own any mining rigs. So it's a fascinating protocol in the way it works. I didn't think it was going to be possible to have a system like this. Just me and almost everybody else working on this space has typically thought of decisions being made by everybody voting on everything and everybody collecting results from everyone. It's an n-squared protocol. Like classical protocols tend to be n-squared. And so Avalanche is not n-squared. It's lower than that. Not everybody talks to everybody else. And it's really fascinating in the way it works. And it has these nice properties that it scales really well, doesn't involve mining, it's completely green, and gives you very, very, very quick decisions. So I'm really excited about the possibilities around this. So one of the things that we're doing is we're building a new coin called AVA based on Avalanche. And it innovates on multiple different fronts, not just at the consensus layer, but also on top. And we're beginning to see Avalanche being adopted by other groups, including Bitcoin Cash and others.
Yeah,
that's what
we've published a couple of meditations on it through Medium, and some of the Bitcoin Cash developers are starting to really, if not outright embrace it, they're introducing it more into the dialogue. How important do you think that is? Go ahead.
It's crucial, and there are 2 different ways that Avalanche is finding its way into proof-of-work coins. So there are a lot of people out there who essentially came into cryptocurrencies through Bitcoin, including myself, right? So
Me too.
Actually, that's not true. I was doing cryptocurrencies before Bitcoin too. But there are lots of people who sort of fell in love with the idea and topic through proof-of-work. And so they like what proof of work gives them. They like the idea. It's like your first kiss. You can't forget your first kiss, just like that. So people like what's in the paper, in the white paper. Satoshi's not white paper. So that's fine. But that system is not able to give you quick confirmations. It doesn't scale all that well, and it's open to 51% attacks. If you're not the top coin using your hash function, then you are open to attack. So
it's interesting. We're starting to see that now. Now, maybe ETC, Ethereum Classic, is not the best example necessarily, but it is topical. And
it's not just ETC. ETC just happened last week, but before ETC, there was Bitcoin Private. Bitcoin Gold that was attacked, and before Bitcoin Gold, there were many minor coins that have been attacked, and not to mention. Bitcoin Satoshi Vision people, BSV folks, and they ended up attacking themselves by mistake. These kinds of things happen. These coins are open to proof of work coins are open to 51% attacks, and you would like to be able to achieve checkpoints. But you can't put anybody in charge of establishing the checkpoints because that leads to centralization, and that's exactly what we're here to avoid. So Avalanche can be used in two different modes. One, to achieve decisions on transactions before they go into blocks. So that gives you quick confirmation. And another way in which it achieves a decision or finality on blocks that have been buried a little bit. Let's say, double confirmed blocks or triple confirmed blocks. And so if you do the former, then you have very quick on-the-spot payments. If you do the latter, then you have automatically generated decentralized checkpoints, and it makes you immune to 51% attacks. So it's a pretty interesting system to combine Avalanche with a proof of work system.
Yeah, and I've started to see it. I think prior to the 15 November fork, or I should say upgrade for Bitcoin Cash, when it turned contentious, and then essentially the chain split. Now it seems like there's a little bit more room to have that discussion, to talk about these issues more candidly. Do you think? And again, I keep kind of going away and then coming back, and I promise we will return. Mm-hmm. Do you think that maybe is the principal lesson of the Bitcoin Cash hard fork this last November, that we saw it kind of all come crashing down essentially, like had there been an avalanche, I guess, sort of in place, that maybe we'd be in a lot less danger of something like this happening?
That's true, and we learned a lot of things at the November fork. So let me try to gather my thoughts on this. So it's really interesting. What happened in November was fascinating to me. So do you want to talk about that? I mean, I can go into this.
Please, really anything you want to talk about, but I know our guys would appreciate your thoughts on it for sure.
Sure. So what did we learn? So one of the first things I learned through that episode was the importance of being principled. So we saw, for example, that a community that sort of gets excited about unprincipled things, goes down and chases narratives that are not based on solid reasons behind them, ends up being bamboozled often. And so in this case, I could have told, in fact, I did tell all the right people, including Roger and Jihan and others, about 1.5 years ago, that the emergence of this particular con man on the scene was actually going to cause issues. And instead, and people didn't really understand the severity of the situation. And if you elevate people without checking their backgrounds properly, without ensuring that they are, what they claim to be, etc., and if you make decisions not based on science but any other reason, then you find yourself, I think, taken over. And in essence, to avoid being taken over, the only recourse you have is to split. And we ended up seeing a big split in the Bitcoin Cash community. So that's one lesson. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. No, and I think a lot of people on the Bitcoin Cash side would definitely agree. Yeah, at least.
Yeah, I think so. I would like to think that I'm pretty well embedded in that community. I care about Bitcoin Cash and would like to see it succeed. But indeed, that was as a community, we kind of did something wrong and we paid dearly for it. That was lesson number one. I think it's just a topic that I can't leave unsaid if we are going to discuss this.
No, I agree.
The second issue, technically, I think what we learned is having some kind of protection against reorg attacks, of which 51% attacks are one kind. It's essential, and Avalanche can definitely help there. And I have spoken to both Bitcoin ABC and Bitcoin Unlimited folks quite a few times about integration with Avalanche, and we are in fact at the moment seeing actual implementations of Avalanche into the Bitcoin Cash code bases, or at least some of them. And I think maybe the third lesson related to this is I think the main thing that came out in the Bitcoin Cash community, and it's important to extract this as a lesson, that the goal here is to make seamless, quick, uncensorable transactions. It's to build a system that can be used. That's the goal. Everything else is secondary. What Satoshi said, as brilliant as he is, as awesome as he is, what's in the white paper, those are all great things, but that's not the goal. The goal is not to get stuck on any one written paper as if it's the word of God. The goal is not any sort of accoutrements that go along with, whatever it is. It's not some superficial thing. It's to make a system work. That's the goal. And I think the Bitcoin Cash folks now get it. That's what all the devs are now trying to do. And that's wonderful to see. So as a result, we're making a lot of progress.
No, I was going to say, and on that point, your embracing full-on of Avalanche has led you to Block's route, and more recently, I saw that you guys are teaming up with, indeed, the Bitcoin Unlimited folks, right?
Yeah, so Block's route has been in the works for some time. It's actually been Block's route came out of work that we did maybe 2.5, 3 years ago. On Bitcoin. Back then, Bitcoin was united. There was only a single Bitcoin, and we decided to build a very, very fast relay network that took transactions and blocks from whoever generated them and sent them to everybody else who was interested in them as quickly as possible. So these relay networks, there was only one at the time, run by Matt Corallo, and Matt seemed to be in the process of shutting it down. And so we jumped in and we looked at the whole process critically, and we came up with some ideas in which we could make it much, much, much faster than anyone else's. So we built this system called Falcon for relaying all these transactions and blocks. And that became the seed of this new system called Bloxroute, or this new company called Bloxroute, for disseminating blocks and transactions for cryptocurrencies, for other kinds of blockchain projects. So Bloxroute is a general purpose infrastructure that can work with any coin. And we specifically did it because the Bitcoin fork was coming up, and we thought we needed some kind of an infrastructure for the Bitcoin Cash side of things as well as other coins. So it's been interesting, and during the fork we saw that the types of things that we pay attention to at Bloxroute are critical for a coin. So we saw Bitcoin, Satoshi's vision, BSV, and attacking itself by mistake. They ended up doing a selfish mining attack against themselves.
Right.
They ended up orphaning their own blocks. Their blocks were taking on the order of 20 minutes to propagate, and they were doing all sorts of things wrong, and they badly need much better relay technology. So Bloxroute provides that in a coin agnostic manner to any coin that wants to use it. It's essentially, just think of it as Akamai, but for blocks and transactions, for cryptocurrencies. We take timely financial data from people who have it, and we send it to people who demand to see it. And it's been an exciting system. We're still in the process of building at the moment. We are going to be doing a securities coin associated with Bloxroute, and we're really excited about the opportunity to work with people who are interested, coin developers, miners, and so forth. And what you're referring to is a recent announcement where we partnered up with one of the mining pools to deploy Bloxroute with them.
Very nice. And so just to kind of delve back a little bit to Avalanche proper and the proof of stake idea, I've been, this is not controversial at all. I've watched Vitalik Buterin embrace proof of stake, at least rhetorically. Do you think that's just an inevitable? Because I know you're also very knowledgeable about the Ethereum side of our ecosystem. Do you think that's an inevitable, evolution, I guess, of Ethereum, especially with their fork or their upgrade is happening this Thursday, right?
So yeah, they have a fork coming up. So let's see. So there are a couple of points to make here. So it's very clear to me that the cryptocurrency space is going to move towards proof of stake. there are lots and lots of amazing features that proof of stake provides over and on top of proof of work. We might also see some hybrid solutions where, as I mentioned, where you combine a protocol like Avalanche with an existing coin.
That's what I'm thinking. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so those are all good ideas as well. But we're going to start seeing coins explore this proof of stake space. So Ethereum did something right, which was from day one, they knew that someday they would switch over to proof of stake. And so they've been working towards this. And because they always committed to changing to proof of stake, for the longest time, they did not have a mining cartel built around their coins. So it didn't really make sense to build specialized hardware for mining Ethereum, knowing that, you know, this switch to proof of stake was around the corner. Well, that corner kind of got moved into the future, right? So they kept pushing it back and back and back because the science wasn't there for their switch. So they are currently trying to sort out the science, and I'm not sure how close they are to a working solution. And I worry a little bit about the similarity between what they plan to do and what EOS does. So, but in any case, we'll see if they are able to deploy according to their own schedule and enact the switch that they really want to do. In principle, I think that switch to a much more efficient sort of a protocol that gives you quicker finality is a great switch. But, okay, there are still lots of buts with proof of stake protocols. There are lots of other things that Ethereum needs to be working on, and there are lots of issues specifically with their switch to proof of stake. So proof of stake protocols can actually suffer from centralization, where people who have enough coins on day one always grow their coins, you know, more and more and more, and the rich get richer and the poor get left behind. That happens also with proof of work systems, but it happens even worse for proof of stake systems. So they need to do something about that problem. Their protocol doesn't really seem, it doesn't seem incorrect to me at the moment, but doesn't really seem all that correct either. So it's somewhere in the middle, and I have some worries about their claims. So you know, it's going to be interesting to see how they pan out.
Agreed. What an amazing time to be alive. What an amazing space to be working in. I can't even.
Isn't it? Isn't it? So on occasion, I just sort of like wake up and I think, wow, you know, like, yeah, there are lots of stupid things happening in this space, you know, like Russia bans Bitcoin and then it unbans it, and China does the same depending on whatever. God knows what's happening in India. So the regulators are doing crazy stuff. The SEC comes in and it slaps hard the couple of coins that are doing obviously bad things, but somehow that has a ripple effect even on, like, you know, it's crazy stuff happens all the time. But if I take a step back and I think about where we are, we're in the middle of a total revolution. No, it's not even in the middle. We're at the beginning of a total revolution. And the revolution is really important. It's a step away from building client-server systems to peer-to-peer systems. So for the longest time, we built systems where I was a client and somebody with deep pockets provided services to me. Mm-hmm. And that somebody with deep pockets is Google, Netflix, Facebook, and so forth. And what do? They abuse their situation, right? So that's in the nature of natural monopolies. They give you service, you're a poor pleb, and you do your part. It's no different from the Middle Ages. And the people in charge of these spigots, of these servers that provide you the services that you badly seek, then are in a position to do all kinds of evil. And even if their motto is don't do evil, they end up doing a little bit of evil at least, and then sometimes great evil. Mm-hmm. So now we're beginning to figure out how to build systems that are truly decentralized, where there really is nobody who can misbehave, where you and I and people we have no idea about can collaboratively implement a service without having to trust one another. That's the big thing here, and that's what gets me going. So, you know, I think about, as I said, all these like small like setbacks and so forth, and on any given day there's some crisis, you know, somebody getting attacked, somebody saying silly things on whatever, and you know, there's like all sorts of issues going on. But at the highest level, we are making progress towards a great future where there is much less centralization in the hands of few, and there is much more of a role for regular people to play in the governance, in the implementation of systems that they care about, starting with money, but going on to all sorts of other aspects of human life, including corporations run by smart contracts, including all sorts of other things of human life.
Wow, what a fantastic way to end. I was going to ask you what your outlook was for the space. So you just hit that out of the park. I have.
I'm really bullish. So I spend my time on I say negative things because people are doing wrong stuff technically, and I feel compelled to call it out. Like if I know what's wrong with it, I typically say, hey, whatever is happening in this coin or there or whatever is. Has an issue. So if I read my own tweet stream, it feels like, well, it's I could do the brainless thing of just putting out positive crap, but that's really not that's other people are doing it much better than I am, and that's not really my role. But deep down, I'm a really optimistic person in this space. I believe this technology will transform how we build companies, how we run business, how we run daily lives. So it's an extinction level event for certain incumbent companies. So, fast forward 20 years, I don't really, I don't know why insurance companies will, for example, continue to function the way they have been. I think it's really big for them. And there are many other areas of in finance, actually, in subfields of finance, where it's going to get disrupted by these technologies. And but going forward, it's an extinction level event for some, and it's an enormous opportunity for many others. I will see lots and lots of clever new companies come in to fill the gaps. We'll see much better technology that will allow us to sleep better at night. And this is a little harder to convey, but this technology, unlike others, doesn't require trust. You and I or anybody else can just verify what has happened. And that gives people a level of assurance that they just don't have with any other system. The way we build businesses right now, the way we regulate them is you have audits and this and that, and and the auditors only check for things that have gone wrong in the past, and and there are a whole bunch of other limitations of the entire process. Whereas with these technologies, anyone can essentially audit and verify the public record. And that allows people to sleep well at night. And that changes one's relationship with things like one's government. You can hold your government accountable. We just haven't had this technology until now. And having it is just a game changer. It's just a different way of living. You know where the money is going. You know where the land records are. I can go on and on. And it's just I think an enormous opportunity. It's just fantastic time to be living.
Wow, what a great way to end. I have taken way too much of your time. I told you 30 minutes, and I pushed you way beyond that, and you've been super generous to indulge me here. You have a blog that right off the top escapes me. Is it Hacking Distributed?
Yeah, so people who are interested in what I have to say can come over to hackingdistributed.com. We also have a Telegram channel for Avalanche, and it's Avacoin official.
Okay.
AVACOIN _ official. So Avacoin _ official. Come over. We can talk about Avalanche there. And what else is going on now? Or follow me on Twitter. I'm Elite Haxor, EL33T H4XOR. So
I'll link to all these in the show notes as well. So
great, and feel free to edit me down. I tend to just talk.
You're nuts. I'm not editing a word out.
Okay.
I really. This has been a long time coming for me personally.
Great.
I know everybody was eager to kind of hear your thoughts on these issues, so it's nice to have it in one place in recorded time here, kind of a document. So thanks so very much again for coming on, Professor Sirer, and best of luck in the future.
Thank you, Ed. Greatly enjoyed chatting with you. Thanks for having me.